Okay, good morning. Let's see, it is October 28th, 2006. I'm sitting here with Dennis Musil and Dave Priegnitz. Would you guys first just introduce yourselves and just tell us briefly what you do and identify yourselves?
Okay, my name is Dennis Musil. I'm retired, have been for about 11 years. Do you want me to say something about the T28?
Sure. Or where are you from and where you've been living?
Oh, I've in 1990, I moved back to Wisconsin with my wife, and we're living back there at the present time. I worked from 1990 to 1995 part-time for the Institute, and while I was retired, but now I'm full-time retired. We live on our house, which we built in northern Wisconsin out in the woods.
I'm Dave Priegnitz. I live in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma. I work for the University of Oklahoma. I'm affiliated with the National Severe Storms Lab. I worked with the T28 from 1981, and I left in 1985 to move to Omaha for a while. I came back in 1989, but I didn't get involved with the T28 when I came back at that point. I guess any other questions you have with this?
Sure. One second.
I broke it already.
Okay, so Dennis, can you tell me how you came to be involved with T28 and what your initial duties were and how your background led into this project?
Okay, I was working for the Institute from about 1967. That's when I first came, and it was either 1970 or 1971. I can't remember for sure that Dick Schleister asked me if I would be interested in working with the T28 project, and I said yes. And after that, my duties have always been about the same with it. Well, maybe in general I should explain. We always went out into the field with a pilot, an engineer for the data system, somebody to take care of the data system, the work that Dave did, and then a mechanic for the airplane. I was the person who went into the field and was the person who was responsible for calling up alerting the T28 to flying, and then once airborne, I vectored him into areas of the cloud that we wanted to penetrate with the T28.
So what was your expertise that qualified you to do this?
I was a meteorologist. I'm a meteorologist at the time, and I was working in a lot of field projects and had the background in cloud physics and weather modifications. So it was all very familiar to me, that type of work, and I was used to working with aircraft because I was in the Air Force for several years before taking the job at the School of Mines. And so I think I had the background to do this sort of thing.
So what were the projects that you were working on in those years?
Well, this whole thing has brought back so many memories. It's hard to sort it out. But the funniest part of it is it's the old memories that are the strongest. It's the more recent ones I'm having trouble recalling for some reason. But
Old
anyway,
age.
Yeah, old age. Anyway, we started out after the T28 was developed. I think there were a few cloud penetrations that were done in Rapid City before I was on the project. They were testing it. They had just received the airplane. I think that happened maybe in 1969, 1970. And then in 1971, there was a project that became known as the National Hail Research Experiment. And we were a part of that. And we first went out into the field with the airplane in 1971. It was a so-called practice year. They got everybody out into the field to see if they could actually pull this off. And it worked okay. And then 72 became the first year in the field. That was down in Colorado, northeast Colorado, where we worked. And it went it went from that project, which was 72, 73, 75, 76. Then we went, spent a year in Oklahoma. I think that was in the late 70s. Probably missing some of these things. We also went to Montana for another big national project called COPE. I was trying to think of what that acronym stood for, and I can't remember anymore.
Cooperative Convective Precipitation Experiment or something like that.
It had to do with convective storms, and with many groups involved. There must have been a dozen groups, maybe 8 or 9 airplanes connected with the project. We went there. We also went to, a few years later, went to Switzerland for 2 different years. We were up in Canada for a couple of years. We were down south, went back to Oklahoma again. We went down to Alabama 2 different times, down in Florida. So we traveled around. We were pretty much in demand to go to different places because no one had really made the observations inside clouds of this strength and intensity.
Yeah, now could you explain for those of us who are not atmospheric scientists what the point was of going inside one of these clouds? What were you measuring? Why did you have to go inside the clouds? What were you looking for?
Well, like I said before, these sorts of measurements hadn't been made on a routine basis before. So we wanted to find out what was going on inside there, what kind of hydrometeors, as they're called, are the raindrops, hailstones, ice crystals. And so equipment was developed to measure these various things. We could make measurements from the entire spectrum of things that were in the clouds, from the tiny cloud droplets which you can't see up to hailstones that, well, the airplane was designed to withstand a 3-inch hailstone hit. Yeah, but we didn't, we cut short of that. We didn't go into stuff that strong, at least not willingly.
And it was your job, as I take it, to direct the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
You would basically decide where that pilot was going to go.
Yeah,
so
and also to alert them. I was sitting out on a field project site someplace wherever the radar was located, and I would be watching the radar, very often watching the clouds, trying to pick the best time for the airplane to fly. We were sort of restricted to 1 flight a day, and we could only stay up about 1 hour at a time. So the problem became pick a time during the day when the clouds might be able to good enough to penetrate a hailstorm, which is not as easy as it sounds. You have to be able to pick the thing at just the right time so that you're there, because hailstorms are kind of sometimes short-lived, and you want to get in there at the optimum time. Because when you went back down, and maybe Dave can back me up on this, that once you penetrated clouds, strange things tended to happen inside the data system, and it made it a little bit tough to go back up again.
Stuff gets
And,
wet,
yeah,
doesn't it?
tough to get good data that second time.
There you go.
Want to go back?
Sure. So
From the very beginning and all the way through, there were 2 things that really concerned us when we were out in the field, or at least concerned me. I wanted good, accurate radar data so that I knew where I could send him with a minimum of problems. And the other thing was the tracking capability. We went from the very beginning, when we used the standard position equipment from aircraft that they normally use, and it's not very, very accurate. Often if you're within 2 miles of where you think you are, that's about as good as it gets. That's not only hard from my standpoint of determining where to go, but between a combination of, I thought, good communication that we had with the pilot and what he sees and what he tells me and what I'm seeing on the radar, we could make penetrations that I thought were very good. But as the tracking systems developed and got better, the latest one that I was familiar with was tied to the GPS systems, and that was very accurate. And it went from little blips on a radar screen in the very beginning, on a radar screen, and with the weather data that sometimes you couldn't see, and sometimes it would drop out to actual tracks that would show a trail of where the airplane had been. It kind of like a worm crawling around on the screen, because it went wherever the airplane went. And once we got to that phase, we got very accurate about where we could get, and I think the quality of the data improved a lot after that too.
So where were you trying to send this plane? Can you sort of explain for us?
We had a limit of 55 dBz that we wouldn't send him into, and that was my job to keep him away from that. As the tracking got better, we'd skim right up to the edge of the 55 dBz, and sometimes funny things, strange things happened, and you'd get inside it, and you'd get very rough rides, sometimes very strong updrafts. But that was my primary concern, to keep him out of that problem, because I couldn't tell you anymore why we decided on 55 dBz, because that's not equivalent to a 3-inch hailstone, but I think it was just a little caution factor that we threw into the game.
That was more conservative probably than a 3-inch hailstone?
Yes, but it worked well for us.
Did you have a lot of concern in the early years about the safety of the pilot?
Yes. He did too. I'm sure you can maybe get into this this afternoon, especially when you talk to Wayne Sand, because there were several dead stick landings. We were getting things prepared. One that I know of right down on the highway, on Highway 79, south of town here, the engine quit. We were supposed to go to Switzerland one year, and the plane was in transit. It was flying out to the East Coast, where it was going to be boarded on a ship, but an engine failed on the way out there. That wasn't quite dead stick, but there were several of these instances, and over the years the engines got progressively, would you say, more powerful.
Yeah, and then I think there was enhancement made in the engine in the Switzerland case, because I think then they put an electric pump to pump oil through the engine before they started it. I think part of the problem with the engine was the oil would settle to the base of the engine, and when they cranked the engine over, the top part would probably be dry, and that would cause stress on the engine. So when they put that electric pump in to circulate the oil before they started, I think that made a huge difference.
Yeah, but it's still things. Well, this was before that in Montana. The engine, something went wrong with the engine during the project, and we had to set out for many days while the airplane went back to Minneapolis and put a new engine in it to get back. And then we came back onto the project again. And parts and engines were hard to find. I may be wrong on this, but when the T28 was first selected to be used for this job, one of the reasons they took it was that there were a lot of T28s around, and it was powerful in general. But Vietnam came along about the same time, and all of a sudden T28s disappeared, so the spare parts went away and engines went away. It was an interesting time.
Can you tell me a little bit about the experience you were just talking about, being out in the field? Was this almost every summer, and what was it like, and just where did you stay, and what was the daily routine like, just on a practical level? Do you remember?
They were all similar, but maybe the one in Colorado is the one that comes back to memory, because they set up shop outside of a little town called Grover in northeast Colorado. Grover maybe had 100 people left in it, and they just set the radar up on a hill outside of town and put all kinds of project buildings up where the radar equipment could be set and where people could eat, and then there were a lot of spare houses in town, empty houses, so the project rented those, and we all had rooms someplace bunked together in different houses in town. And I think as far as Grover went, I ended up living in just about all of them that they had at one time or another.
You were there year after year?
Yeah. Their daily routine was one of getting up and showing up for breakfast early in the morning. There seldom was any convective activity early in the morning that was of any consequence. So we'd get set up, and I think it was about 10 or 11, we'd have the daily briefing, the daily weather briefing, and the operational briefing, what we planned to do for the day. And there were many scientists from NCAR, University of Wyoming. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I can't remember all of them that were there. But there were about half a dozen airplanes on that project, and they would they weren't all there, those pilots, but the representatives were, and they would notify people about what was going to be happening, whether it was going to be a good day for convective activity or whether it was a day you could tear the airplane apart or do something like that. And then it was sitting around and waiting. We did a lot of that, and watch the clouds and watch the radar. And, when most of the other aircraft flew long before we did, because they wanted to get in the earlier convective activity where they could make observations like that, but we wanted to wait for something stronger. And so when I would see the right conditions, or what I thought was the right conditions, and that was a combination of what I saw on the radar and what I could see outside in the clouds were this is the neat feature of the Mountain West. You can see clouds forever. They're all over. Anything you're going to work, you can easily see very vividly. And so I'd make the attempt to get them up in the air at the right time. And most of the time we were pretty successful, I thought. And we'd make the penetrations and go back down, and from there lots of things happened back at our site where the airplane was located, to see whether how the data had been.
So typically when you were taking measurements inside a cloud, about how far away would this plane be from you?
60 miles.
Oh.
Radio contact got to be a problem if you got too low, and then I wouldn't be able to talk to him. So, and if we didn't have radio contact, we just broke off, wouldn't do anything. So it was the project area that they were dealing with. Well, it became a cloud seeding experiment down there at the same time as time went on, and so the project area wasn't too big. They were looking for trying to prove whether hail suppression worked or not. And so the project area was fairly close. Small because, well, the Knights had to have a lot better feel for this than I do, but the project area I think was small because they needed to instrument highly with rain gauges and hail pads, anything that they could make measurements that would be useful then in correlating things that happen from the airplane measurements with what's happening on the ground. And that gets to be a huge problem because you're if you got a big project area, it takes a lot of money and a lot of equipment to instrument something like that.
Now, none of these flights actually involved cloud seeding, did they? You were just studying the natural clouds as they developed?
Some of them may have been seeded. I don't think many were that we were working with. But the seeding project was going on, and I guess I don't. To answer the question, I don't think we knew at the time because it was a blind experiment. We didn't know whether the clouds were being seeded or not.
That makes sense. Dave, should we jump in with you for a while and talk about instruments? Give Dennis a break here.
Okay, yeah.
Can you tell us basically what your job was on these T28 projects?
Yeah, my job was I guess, I came to work for the IAS in '80. This was in October of '80, and I got involved a little bit with some data analysis or programming with another project. But I guess it was in the fall of '81. The IAS purchased a new data system to put on T28. It was a micronova data system. And so my job was to program the data acquisition system, write all the software for data acquisition for the new micronova system.
It's basically a computer, right?
Computer, yeah.
Digital computer. Can you describe this computer?
Well, Data General was the company that manufactured it. I think it had 32K memory on it. So compared to today's, I mean, I can't believe it had so little. And then it had a state-of-the-art disk drive system on it. It had 2 hard disk drives. One was removable. They both could hold 5 megabytes on each disk. And I thought, man, that was pretty neat because that was a lot of stuff. But the big challenge is that my education is basically meteorology, and so I'm doing this software development, and all the software development needed to be done in assembly language on micronovas. So I had to quickly learn how to do that, and then the first project that actually we were going to use the new data system on was the Swiss project. So we needed to get that working and test it out before we went overseas. I mean, if it didn't work, that wouldn't look very good, I guess. We couldn't get this thing working. So I guess in a sense, having the problem with the engine, I guess it was 1982, bought us a little more time to test more of the data system out, because I believe the T28 was supposed to leave in May, I think, wasn't it, or something like that. And so we thought, well, when the pilot had problems with the engine, I think it was Kokomo, Indiana, or something like that. But we thought, well, that's going to kind of take care of the project for that year. But then found out that they could make arrangements to get the plane over yet that summer, so we could go over in '82 for a few weeks anyway and have a shortened season. So it gave us a good chance to test things out operationally that year. And so then, of course, the plane was stored over in Switzerland over the winter, and then we went back over in '83 again. But basically my job was to, when the plane was ready to go on a flight, I'd sit in the back behind the pilot. Once he started the engine up, I'd get the computer running, test it out before he left, and make sure I jump out before he took off. That was the key. And I know the pilot always threatened to close the canopy on me and leave me in there in the back.
Would you have had room to sit there if you had to?
No, there's no seat.
Oh.
Because that's where the computer was. I kind of had to crouch down with a handheld terminal to kind of check things out, make sure it was all running. The big thing was the program would load off a tape. We'd have a tape preloaded. The program would load off a tape, and then we could enter a few commands from the handheld terminal and get the software running. And so I'd look and see if the tape was actually going, and that was actually, the data system was up and running. And once it was up and running, then I'd crawl out and jump off, and I kind of signaled to the pilot that I was done, and so then he knew I was out of the airplane. And that worked out pretty good. And then once the flight was done, then when the plane got pulled back to the hangar, then we'd connect the ground-based system in with the computer, and we could look at the data actually.
So the data actually ended up on tapes?
On tapes.
In digital format, I guess?
Yeah.
And it would run through this computer first?
Yeah.
And about how many different instruments are we talking about getting the data onto this system?
Quite a few. I know Dennis probably knows more about that, remembers more about that. I know you have the probes, the 2D probes they had on there,
Yeah,
but they vary the instrumentation based on what the focus of the project was all about.
But the instruments weren't your jobs?
No, that was engineer Gary Johnson was the one that handled the instrumentation.
You just had to make sure that data got stored.
Yeah.
Did it always get stored?
Got collected and stored. For the most part, yeah. Once at least with the micronova, once things, one problem we had at the beginning was we had problems with the tape drive unit, and for some reason it would stop. And so, of course, the pilot had no way of starting it back up again. So, but I think that we had a couple instances in Switzerland the first season, but then there was a problem, I guess, with some cable link or something, but one of the Swiss engineers helped us get that problem resolved, and once he got that resolved, we didn't have any problems after that. So the big thing was when the plane came down and landed and pulled it in the hangar, first thing we checked to see whether the tape was still going yet. because it was still going, then we knew that it was still recording. But if it didn't, then it's like, okay, when did it stop?
So I'm a little bit curious about this whole Switzerland experience. You both went to Switzerland. Can you tell us about that?
Well,
Did you really have to go to Switzerland, or is this just a junket?
no.
Well, I know one of the reasons was about that time, or before that, Russian scientists claimed that the embryos for hailstones were frozen raindrops. And I don't think we ever believed that, but we were going over there presumably to test that out in Swiss hailstorms. And that was one of the reasons they wanted us to come over and look.
That was a big drop zone, you called it? or something?
Yeah, they had something called a big drop zone, where these big drops would be in the cloud and then they'd freeze, and all of a sudden you'd have a lot of hail coming down. But I don't think it works that way. And we pretty well proved that from the instrument, or from the data that we measured, we had actual images of what we were looking at. They definitely were a minuscule number of drops that were in there, just not part of the thing. It was an ice process that was going on inside these clouds, just like they do over here too, for the most part.
So you were in Switzerland because clouds may form differently there, or because that area gave...
I think that had a lot to do with it, yeah.
And the Swiss actually requested that we
Yeah.
come over too, so it wasn't really on our, it wasn't us that just said, okay, we want to go over there and do this. The Swiss actually wanted us to come over. And they were getting funded, through insurance companies?
I think so.
To actually, to do this, because if you can investigate the whole process, and if cloud seeding actually does work for suppressing hail, then the insurance industry has a big interest in that too, because if they can avoid paying lots of money in damages for hail damage.
I may be wrong on this, but I think there was a connection between Swiss scientists and a Russian scientist too, that they wanted to find out whether this worked, and they were kind of collaborating. I think the Russians were interested in finding out too.
So did you look forward to these summer field sessions? Was that the exciting part of the year, or was it exhausting, or was it boring, or what was your attitude all about that? I'm interested in these summer field sessions.
I looked forward to them all the time. My wife didn't. But in later field projects, she got to go along down to Colorado a few times, to North Dakota and down to Florida after the kids got bigger. So she was actually down in the area. I think she liked it a lot better.
You had your family in Switzerland, so.
Yeah, my family was in Switzerland too.
Oh, so did you get to take some vacation time, or was there any fun mixed in with all this work?
Well, we were over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, the Swiss know how to fight wars. They had time off. They closed their bases early and didn't want us running if we didn't have to. So we had time off.
Yeah, they didn't work weekends, so we couldn't operate on the weekend. And although I remember the second year we came over, we wanted to check the airplane. I guess Gary wanted to check the airplane, engineer wanted to check the instrumentation and everything, check the plane out. So we went over on a Saturday morning, and so we had to go over on the military side to get in. We had to check in at the guard shack, and all I remember is this big, huge German Shepherd guard dog, the guard holding the dog, and the dog sitting there staring at us, and the head of that dog could eat us in one gulp. But I mean, that was kind of scary, just looking at that dog. It's like, man, if he lets go of that dog, we're goners.
But the projects were a combination of all the things you mentioned. They were fascinating. It was a great job, but they were boring as could be sometimes because the weather doesn't cooperate very much. You know, maybe if you get a hailstorm or something approaching a hailstorm every third or fourth day, you're probably lucky on a field project. So there's a lot of waiting around to see what's going to happen.
And on days where it was clear that nothing was going to happen, what did you do?
Played a lot of horseshoes and volleyball where I was. I'm not sure what these guys did.
You know, in Colorado, I guess after Switzerland, we went to guess Maypole was at the project, dual polarization or some
Yeah.
project down in. So we were at the Fort Collins level in the airports where the plane was, and then of course Dennis would have to go to Boulder. That's where there were operations. was
Right,
in Boulder.
that's where the radar was.
So we, yeah, there were a couple of things we did to Dennis, because one of the instruments that we were testing out was this hail catcher. We talked to, I guess, Nancy Knight, I think, was the one that designed that.
Mhm.
But it was supposed to be packed with dry ice before we go on flight, and the hope was that it would catch a hailstone and the dry ice would keep it frozen. But it seemed like when we tried it out for a while, it would always be melted. You get a drop, pull the cup off, and you get a couple drops of water in it, so everything melted. But we had some fun with the dry ice. I know one time we put a hunk of dry ice in a balloon and threw it in the back of the car before we went down the boulder. So I think it exploded on the way down.
Yeah, there were
So
lots of
you-
activities to keep us busy.
Yeah, so there's things like that to keep you busy. But no, but you found things to do to make it interesting anyway. I know it was kind of boring sometimes when it's a down day and you're out at the airport. You can only test out the computers and stuff so long. I mean, you know it works, but you can run some old data through and see what the old data looked like. But the big thing is you're hoping that some storms develop, so you have actually there's something interesting going on. So, but like for me, if the plane actually went off on a flight, then while he's flying, there's nothing for us to do. So Dennis that's where Dennis would come in, because he'd have to be in communication with the pilot the whole time. And so then that would give us, the ground crew would give us a chance to, if we had to run off and run an errand while the plane was up, then we could go do that.
So, Dennis, what you were describing in the early years sounded like a big project. I mean, we're talking about several airplanes, buildings being constructed and all that. And remind me what years roughly you were involved in all these flights?
That early stuff in Colorado, that National Hail Research Experiment, that ran from '71 when they had that practice, when they had a practice year to get systems online, and then they ran in '72 and '73. And we got some very good data out of that. I think '74 was a standout year to do anything. '75 they wanted to test some things on the T28, so they opened up, got all the equipment going again, and it was primarily the T28, I think, that year that was involved. And then '76 was a big season down there again, where they made some improvements, especially as far as tracking the airplanes and stuff. I guess at any one time on those projects, I'm trying to think again, there were maybe three planes from NCAR, one from the University of Wyoming, the T28. They even had a glider that they released to penetrate storms. Unfortunately, it wanted to penetrate storms near the same levels we wanted to penetrate, so that sometimes people got cross-threaded over where we were going to go, who was going to do what. But generally it worked out. So maybe a half a dozen airplanes on that project.
And how late were you involved in all this again?
How late?
Yeah.
Well, I retired. I went on in 1990, but I kept coming back on the field projects all through the early 90s, and I think it was 1995 we were on a project down in Colorado, and that was the last one I worked on. I retired completely.
So, through all that time, from let's say 1970 through the 1990s, were there changes in the program? Were you basically?
Yeah, huge changes, because you went from something that was very crude for data gathering for scientific work to something that became very modern and high technology stuff, both from the data standpoint and the actual operational problems of dealing with something like this. Multiple airplanes in the sky at the same time, trying to communicate with each other. A lot of planning went on to make sure that people weren't going to fly into each other.
Mm-hmm. Did the programs get bigger, smaller?
Now, the COPE program was larger than any of the ENRI programs. Some of the other places that we went, it varied. Sometimes, as in Switzerland, we'd be the only airplane there. So everything was set up for us. Other times in Oklahoma and down in Florida, there would be other airplanes on the project, or multiple radars many times, or looking at a storm from different angles and trying to get a better three-dimensional picture of what the storm is.
Dave, over your years were there, what would you say were the big changes in the program, the changes at least in your job from the early years?
Oh, I guess since I was kind of really, the time period was kind of fairly short because it was like 81 to 85. I guess there really wasn't a whole lot of change over that time, I think, because that the data system that I programmed and operated, that was really that wasn't replaced until after I left. I think it. I'm trying to think when they replaced that. Was it in '86 or '87? They put a different computer in.
I think so.
But that was right after I left, so things were pretty stable when I was working on it. There wasn't really many changes.
Dennis, maybe you can even tell me this from the early years. Was there a sense that this project was a great success, a moderate success? Did it fulfill their expectations or exceed their expectations?
I think it was a great success. We were in demand to go to different places. And it's always a matter of finding money to do that. But people were really interested in what was going on inside the clouds.
Well, the big thing is you got these remote sensors like radar, but you need to have some sort of verification. And the only way you can verify it is to actually go in and measure it. And so you had to have something like the T28 to actually go in there and verify it. Because I mean, you don't know. I mean, you can point a radar at something and you say, well, that's what this is showing. But until you could actually get in there and measure it and prove that that's what you're doing, then that's where the T28 came in. So I think it was real successful.
Did you have a gig every summer? Did you have...
Not every summer. We tried to because we operated over the years on obtaining our own funding to do these things. And when we didn't have our own funding, there was always a concern that there might not be any work to do. Either be laid off or have to take time off. But most of the time we worked our way through it.
Now, on the practical level for you, were you both working on soft money, on contract money, or did you have hard state dollars? Or what were you, when you weren't doing T28 stuff, what were you doing the rest of the time, the rest of the year? Dennis?
I was working primarily on the T28 data that we gathered, working with other scientists, analyzing the data and trying to find out what the hail mechanism was that was going on inside these clouds. Quite a few master theses came out of it. There were quite a few publications over the years, right on through.
So you sort of had you had a two-part job. You were directing the plane during those short, brief periods of data acquisition, but then you did a lot of the data analysis as well.
Right.
Did you enjoy that part of the job? Or?
Oh yeah, it was fun to go on the field projects, but it's fun to work on it's better to work on the data. That's where the answers come in, I think.
Dave?
One side
Go
of
ahead.
it, with the T28, it's a two-place airplane. But the decision was made pretty early on to not have a second person in the airplane. And I think it was partly because of the data system that needed to occupy that space, or at least part of it. But the other thing was, it was told to me anyway, that it's kind of dangerous if there's a problem in the air. It's kind of dangerous, kind of hard to get out of the back seat safely. There's a tendency of been instances of people jumping out of disabled airplanes like that and getting clipped by the tail structure as they jumped out. The pilot didn't have the same problem because the way he described it, he'd roll out of the cockpit. He would roll out of the cockpit if he had to and bounce off the wing, and that would throw him up into the slipstream and get him out of the way. So, and I think
and he described that with enthusiasm, huh?
Yeah.
And a bottle of wine.
That's the way it's supposed to work. Dave, how about you? Was this the big part of your year, or what were you doing all the time?
No, I helped with some of the getting data for people, or did maybe a little bit of data analysis, but I was working on other projects too. I kind of helped support other programs. The IAS got money from North Dakota for their weather map program for analysis and studying that program, and so I helped with some of the data analysis on that. There were other little things that I'd provide support on. So,
But you were basically on soft money
all
too?
soft money.
All soft money?
Basically. Well, yeah, there may have been times where they may have had to cover myself for maybe a month or two out of the year, and they actually may have pulled it out of some base funds. I don't know, that was magic that the bosses took care of. I didn't worry about that.
Now, I taught in the Department of Meteorology too, so that was not soft money, but there wasn't very much of it.
Yeah, these days IAS seems to be about 3/4 soft money and about 1/4 hard money teaching, things like that. So that was about typical for your times too?
Yeah, I didn't teach
Yeah,
those.
You didn't teach anything?
It seemed, I guess I may be wrong on this, but it seemed to me it was less than 25%, but
Oh.
I may be wrong.
Yeah, I think I didn't teach, but just from watching these guys that were teaching, they'd probably get, maybe like you said, 25% for teaching, but you probably spent more than 25% because then you had students coming in, you had to deal with them too, so you probably spent more time than 25% actually.
Did graduate students play an active role out in the field? Did they come along? Were they there?
Yeah, there was usually one that well, in the later, I guess maybe in the later years, but there was usually a graduate student out there working, doing stuff.
Sort of helping along and...
Yeah, I think in Montana, I remember one particularly that was up there, and I think he was working with the data system primarily, making sure that was going good. I don't know, were they along on those other projects?
I don't think there were any of the ones I was on. The Swiss project there wasn't. In Colorado, I don't think there were any grad students. I know the Swiss had students that were that were involved in on the Swiss side, in Switzerland, but we didn't have any.
So someone, when I write the history of this, is going to ask me, so, what was the contribution of the T28? Where does this fit into the big picture? Its contribution to science, or its contribution to your life? Or, can you help me answer that? What would you say that is?
Hopefully it's helping understand helping to understand the precipitation mechanism that goes on inside clouds. We know the air goes in, rain comes out, but that intermediate stuff is still pretty much a mystery. And if we contributed to that, I'd say we will have done our jobs. And I think we did.
Yeah, I can't describe it any better than that. That's probably the way I'd look at it too.
Is there anything else that you remember about the T28 that we haven't touched on?
There was a lot of, my short time, I had a lot of good experiences with the people that I worked with. It's just, you can't trade any of that back. We had some good times. You're out in the field together, and you have to kind of get along. Sometimes we didn't as well as we like to, but for the most part, we all got along well.
So it was okay.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for talking with me today. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.